Good morning, everybody. We're going to be a little bit different today, so you have to try a little bit harder to pay attention. Normally, when I teach, I find one topic and I go for that topic. Today, we're going to bounce around a little bit, and I'm actually going to have three different topics. All right. I want to start out by putting you into a story. All right. I want you to imagine that you grow up and you become a pastor or a pastor's wife in India, and you have a good church. The Lord is blessing your ministry. You're having great success. You love your church. You love your people. People are responding. One Sunday, all of a sudden, a group of men show up during your church service with guns and they open fire on your church. The people that you love and have been teaching are being killed in front of you. They take you outside. They hold you and they make you watch while they burn your church. They tell you that if you continue to preach, you continue to tell people that they need to switch to Christianity, that everyone that you lead, them and their families, are going to die. They tell you that you're next if you don't stop. A week later, you go to town. You see those men hanging out in town. I want you to think about, how do you feel? They didn't try to hide their face. What they did, the government's allowing them to do. Are you afraid? Do you hate them? How do you feel? You see these men who made you watch the horrible things they did. How do you feel? Let's take it to the next level. A week later, you're driving down the road. You see a car in the ditch. When you get out to help this person, you realize that it was the man who had held you and made you watch. That man is stuck in a ditch. His wife and his children are in the car. They don't know what he did. All you know is that this man did something horrible, and now he's stuck and he needs help. How do you react? Do you laugh at him? Do you pull out a gun and threaten him and his family like he did you? Do you go back and tell his family what a horrible, horrible, rotten person he is? Well, how do you react? What do you do? What I want you to think about this morning is I want you to think about the way that we react to things that happen to us in life. Problems, tragedies, stresses, whatever. The way that we react makes all the difference in the world for how effective we are for the kingdom of God. If you go back to that man and you do something hateful, or you just leave him there, he may remember you the next time he goes to another Christian church, and it may make him hate him even more. But if you go back to them people and you remind him who you are, and you help him, and you forgive him as Christ has taught us to do. When Jesus was hanging on that cross, bleeding, dying, can't breathe, tortured, they're laughing at him. He was forgiving them while he hung there. If you can forgive this man, the next time he goes to a Christian church, he just might remember you. He just might remember what you did, and it may make him stop. How you react makes a difference. It may take him just far enough to where he might actually believe what you're teaching, and he may convert, and his family with him. Your compassion, your love, your forgiveness may be what it takes to bring this man around. All right? We're going to see that same type of forgiveness, or we're going to see a good reaction today in Paul. All right? We're going to pick back up where we stopped in the book of Acts. The last lesson, a lot of you weren't there. Those that were there, that was a month ago. And I have no doubt you have forgotten what we taught on. All right? So let me catch everybody up really quick before we move forward. Paul and Barnabas are on their very first mission trip throughout Asia. They went to Cyprus. They had to deal with a little bit of a contention with a sorcerer that was there. They leave there. They go to Little Antioch, not Big Antioch, which is who sent them, Little Antioch. And they're drug out of town. Get out of my town now and leave. They go to Iconium. They leave Iconium in a hurry because they hear that some of the people want to kill them. They're going to stone you if you don't leave. So they get out of town and they go to Lystra. Last week they pulled into Lystra. Lystra there was no Jewish synagogue. Okay, they were not believers in the Jewish God, and they even know him in any way, shape, or form. They believed in the Greek gods is who they followed. So they all come into town, and Paul looks at a crippled man who had been crippled his entire life. This man has never walked. God took Paul's attention and put him on this man. And Paul says, get up. And this man, who everybody in town knew had never ever walked, stands up. And these people are amazed because they absolutely know that what just happened couldn't have happened through any other means but God. There is no healing, especially back then. You don't just tell someone who has been crippled their whole life to get up and bam, it works, unless it was God. It doesn't happen. And they recognize this, but these people didn't know God. So they attributed what Paul did to their false gods. And what they believed was that their false gods had come to this world. Paul and Barnabas were their Greek gods come in human form. And they started speaking in the local language, so Paul and Barnabas didn't understand what they were saying. And they started organizing a worship. They were going to actually sacrifice animals and worship Paul and Barnabas as gods. After Paul and Barnabas figure out what's happening, they run into the middle of it and they say, stop! Stop! What are you doing? We are not gods. We are men just like you. We did not heal this man. God healed this man. And then Paul tells them that the God that healed this man was the God that created everything. The God of creation, the God that made you, the God that made me. And by saying so, he was telling them that the God that they followed, the God they worshiped, the God they believed in, wasn't the real God. Now these people are standing there confused. This guy did an act that had to come from God. But he's telling us he's only a man. We believe in the gods that we believe in, but now he's telling us that our gods are not the real God. His God is. And they're confused. So let's read what happens. Acts 14, verse 19. And we're going to be in Acts 14 the whole time, so we won't be moving around. And there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. The Jews that chased him out of Little Antioch, the Jews that chased him out of Iconium, followed them into Lystra. And they saw their opportunity here. They saw this as an opportunity to get them. These people are standing there confused. They don't know what to think. They don't know what to believe. And these Jews stand up and they convince these people to not only not worship Paul and Barnabas, but to kill them. We don't know what happens to Barnabas, but they picked up stones and they stoned Paul to death. And they drug him out of town and left him for dead. People can change so fast. It is amazing how fast these people can turn. Think about it. Why would someone who was 1 second ready to bow down and worship someone as God, minutes later pick up stones and kill him? It's amazing how fast people can turn. Listen, the lost world, you guys, they don't understand truth. They don't have truth. So what they do is they listen to whoever has the loudest voice. Back then, those Jews, at that moment, they came into town and they spoke louder than Paul and Barnabas, and the people listened to them. You got the loudest voice, you're the voice of truth. In today's world, for us, you guys, our loudest voice tends to be our television, our news, our movies, our celebrities. And people listen to them because they got the loudest voice. Right now, everyone's freaking out over COVID-19. Everyone's afraid and scared. Okay, and we should respect it. There should be a level of respect and care taken. But we shouldn't be afraid. our trust ought to be in the fact that God's got it under control. All right? God knows what's happening, and our trust is in Him. But the problem is that we don't hear God in our country anymore. We hear what everyone else around us is telling us. What does that tell you? What does it tell you that that we can hear God, or we don't hear God? Sorry, I'm stumbling. That we hear our news media much louder than we hear the voice of God. What does that tell you? It tells me that our society doesn't care about hearing God anymore. That's where we've gotten. Okay? To our country, to our world, the TV seems more real to them than God. God has faded off into the sunset, and they're not listening anymore. Our reaction as Christians needs to be that we need to start praying. We need to start praying for the world to trust God. We need to start praying for the world to start hearing God, to start seeking God. And we need to be the ones to start telling them about God. Okay? Paul was killed because the voice of the Jews was louder. And that is who these people listened to. So they had drug him out. It says that they supposed he was dead. So let's read what happens next in verse 20. Howbeit, as the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city. And the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. So they dragged Paul out of town. He's a body laying in a field, not moving. There were followers of Christ that were there. And they come out with him, and they're standing there looking down at the body of Paul, not moving, confused. One second they see these people get ready to worship Paul, and the next second they killed him and drag him out, and they're just, wow, what happened? And all of a sudden, Paul gets up and goes back into town. So either Paul was dead and God healed him and raised him from the dead, or he wasn't dead and God simply healed him and brought him back. All right? And he had to have healed him, because you get killed by stones, by being pounded by rocks, you're going to be bruised head to toe. You're going to have bones broken. You're going to be cut and bleeding everywhere. It's not going to be you're going to get up and just walk away. God had to bring some healing there, and God healed Paul. And he got up and he walks back into town. This is where I want to take you back to where I started, and I want you to think about it. How would you react to that? How would you react to that? You saw this man. You're one of these people that are in this town. You saw this man heal somebody who had been crippled his entire life. You thought he was a god. You killed him. And now he's walking around town without any harm. How would you react when you saw him? It might freak you out. He's dead. What's he doing here? God is at work here. And it may have gotten their attention. If Paul would have walked around and gotten their faces and said, you did this to me. Well, look what? God healed me. You wicked heathen. They may not have listened to him. But Paul's going to leave this town, and he's going to leave followers behind, because he reacts in a godly way. Him and Barnabas just spend the night, and they move on to Derbe the next day. No hatred, no anger, no bitterness. They move on to Derbe, and he preaches there, and people get saved. My bet is that there are people from Lystra that saw him, that said, he's alive. And they went to Derbe, and they would have heard him preach. And he got saved. And Derbe is the first town we see him go to where there doesn't seem to be any contention. There seems to be no one bothering him. He can preach freely. And this is where we're going to change gears. Okay? We know as Christians that we are supposed to tell people about Jesus. But after people get saved, is that where we stop? Are we done? Praise the Lord. This person is on their way to heaven, and we're done. No. After that, we are to disciple them. Do you guys know what that means? What does it mean to disciple somebody? Well, it's what we do in church every week. We disciple you. We tell you about God. We teach you about the truths of the Bible. We teach you how to be a good Christian. We teach you what it takes to make God happy and what God expects of you. And that's what we're supposed to do. After someone gets saved, we have to disciple them. Paul and Barnabas have been through 5 different towns now. They left followers behind. When Paul and Barnabas left those towns, at least Little Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra, they left in a hurry. Those churches are kind of left on their own. So now what's going to happen is Paul and Barnabas are going to go back. So let's read 21 through 26 in Acts 14. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and had taught many, they returned again to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith, that we must through much tribulation enter into the kingdom of God. And when they had ordained them elders in every church, and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord on whom they believed. And after they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. And when they had preached in Perga, they went down to Attalia, and thence sailed to Antioch, from whence they had been recommended to the grace of God for the work which they fulfilled. After Derbe, they backtrack through the towns that they had started churches in. There's a church in Lystra. There's a church in Iconium. There's a church in Little Antioch. The problem with those churches was that Paul and Barnabas had left in such a hurry that they didn't have a chance to organize. So now they go back to these churches and they disciple them. They have the time, now that the Jews have left them alone, they have the time to go back and teach these preachers. They have to sit and say, you're the preacher, you're the deacons. This is how you run a church. This is what your job as a preacher is. This is what you're supposed to do. I want you to think about that for a second. Why do they have to do that? You have a church. You have a church somewhere in India. It's your church, right? Why can't you run it any way you want? Why would Paul have to go back and tell these people how they have to run their church? Why would he do that? The answer is because it's not their church. It's God's church. And God has told us how we have to run a church. We have a pastor because God told us to. We have deacons because God told us to. We baptize and do communion because God told us to. We teach you, disciple you, lead you every week because God told us to. That is what God told us to do. We have to run a church the way God told us to. If you ever end up going out to a mission field, being a pastor, pastor's wife, whatever, you don't get to run your church the way you want to. You have to do it the way God has instructed you to do it. So Paul and Barnabas go back to all these churches and they set up these churches. They organize these churches. And then they sail back through a bunch of towns until they get back to Antioch. So let's read when we get there. And when they were come, in verse 27 and 28, and had gathered the church together, they rehearsed all that God had done with them, and how he had opened the door of faith unto the Gentiles. And there they abode long time with the disciples. So I taught you guys that when a missionary is sent out, they are sent by a local church. You don't decide, I want to go and I want to teach in Iran, and you just go, okay? You go because you have the blessing of a local church who has prayed about your work, and you have their agreement that God has his hand upon what you want to do. The church that sent Paul and Barnabas out was Big Antioch. So now they went back to Big Antioch, and they're reporting back to them, this is what happened. Every town we went to, all these people that got saved, this is how they reacted. This is what we left behind. There are churches that are standing in place, believers that are now in these areas witnessing because you sent us. And as you're ever going to be a missionary, that's what you have to do. We have missionaries that come back on furlough and they report to the local churches. We have missionaries that send mission letters every 2, 3, 4 months. And they do that so that we know that the money we spend, we give to them. Our prayers that we give to them are gone for the purpose of reaching people for Christ. And they're letting us know what's happening on their mission field because obviously we can't tell from here. If you're going to be a missionary, that's what you have to do. All right? The lessons I want you to learn from this. This is the end of their first mission journey. It's over. It's done. From what I can see, I think they got 2 or 3 more journeys. What I want you to learn from today's lesson, you guys, is that number one, respond to things in a godly way. Make sure that door is left open for God to reach people, no matter how they treat you. All right. Number two, when we save people, we are to disciple. You disciple young Christians, they've got to be taught. You don't just save people and leave them on their own. And the last lesson, of course, is that if you're going to be a missionary, you need to report to your supporting churches. All right. That's where we're going to stop. Next week, we're going to see an argument. You have the Jews, you got the Gentiles, they have a disagreement. And it's threatening to split the church in half. And we're going to see how they resolve that argument next week.